Is RAW worth it?
In what sense? Like, what RAW are we talking? Because that's broad.
Yeah, video RAW.
One note on photo RAW, definitely, absolutely.
Yes,
okay, now video RAW.
I agree because you get all the dynamic range, and it's just as easy to process.
Yeah.
Video RAW, is video RAW worth it?
Are you coming from a Blackmagic mindset when you're talking about this?
I'm coming from a generalist. Like, you've tested out all of the cameras, and yet you film yourself constantly. But you've told me on several occasions that you don't film yourself in RAW. And when you film things for pleasure, you also don't shoot RAW. And so I find that very interesting, particularly because, our jobs are predicated on explaining things and showing things and explaining the newest items, functions in these cameras. And a lot of these functions these days are like the RAW capability. And so what I want to know from you...
Yeah, it's been a hot one the last year, right? Especially third-party RAW. It's everybody, they're like, we got a firmware update. Now you can do RAW.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's been a big button now.
And a lot of these people don't know how to use RAW, or they'll confuse RAW with log, or they'll expose incorrectly when shooting RAW, right? Like, here's an easy example of that. For when I first got the Blackmagic 4K and we started shooting B-RAW, the first video I did with it was I filmed this $120 million mansion, and the color grading came out so awful. I was so embarrassed because I shot this property. Thank God I shot it with Sony and with Blackmagic, because I was obviously more comfortable with Sony. I'd been shooting real estate with Sony for 4 years at this time. But I shot it, I doubled up on the footage, and I shot it with Blackmagic. But I was shooting RAW, exposing it at 100 or 200 or 300 ISO. I wasn't allowing enough room for that RAW to actually work. I didn't know how it worked. And so I was blown away at how awful the highlights were. I had no highlight recovery at all because
That's funny. I had the exact same. I don't think I realized that happened to you, because my first fun test shoot with the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, I botched half of the shots. I had the exposure as well.
Impossible color grading, and you get these weird color hues, and you can't fix them because you have just clipped all of that information, and yet you shot RAW, and you're like, but I shot RAW. I should be getting 12 and a half or 13 and a half stops of dynamic range. I'm not seeing it.
I think some of that has to do with the dual ADC on the. I think once I approached it more of thinking just treat the camera like it has two ISOs.
So the way that I look at it now is that whatever that base ISO is, so for most cameras it's 640 or 800 or, depending on the gamma and the color space, right? So whatever that base ISO, the base ISO is established at here. It's not at 0. The base ISO is not the cleanest ISO. The base ISO is the ISO that you need to be in order to go down or up to get full dynamic range. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, it's based on their dynamic range charts where they decide the amount of stops above and below that is your maximum dynamic range thing. That's usually your base one. And then as you go up and down, it shifts what's above and what's below for stops as you go up and down in ISO. And so usually I think the native ISO has the balanced above and below stops.
But it's totally counterintuitive. If you're shooting a bright sunny day out at the beach, full exposure, you're shooting at f5.6, you're not gonna put it at ISO 800. But you should be putting it at 640 to 800 if you're shooting on
whatever
6K.
Whatever for the camera, yeah.
But it's not intuitive. You wouldn't think to do that in order to get dynamic range. You would think, put it at ISO 100 and I'm fine.
But I should say, and also to bring you back around to your RAW topic, when I was using the Pocket 4K, I did shoot RAW, and I feel like it's more of an exception to the rule because Blackmagic has done really well to make this kind of end-to-end workflow that works really well. If you go into it thinking, I'm going into the system, I want a Blackmagic camera, I'm going to shoot Blackmagic RAW, I'm going to edit on DaVinci Resolve, then that's the way to do it.
They've made the whole user experience from start to finish seamless. You don't even know that you're shooting RAW. You could color grade and correct the footage without even bothering with the RAW tab, just like you would with ProRes, but without that option. You know what I mean?
And it's not full raw, like pure raw in the sense of like what some people are expecting, but that type of raw implementation is one that I do use and I do like because I do edit on Resolve, and so it all makes sense to me. But if we're talking, if we can make another category for third-party raw, which is the one that's probably the hottest topic right
now ProRes Raw, and
Blackmagic has it as well, but where you record raw from a sort of a different camera system into an external recorder that has to have, matching firmware and stuff like in order to make that work.
So B-Raw for Panasonic and for Nikon cameras.
Exactly. And then ProRes Raw for a lot of other
Sony
ones as well. And also Nikon. And
Now, are we lumping in Canon Raw Lite? Is that going in there? Is that what?
That's not the same thing, but that's also a raw that I don't like.
Right.
So Canon is a perfect example, in my opinion, of where raw doesn't make sense. I've seen a lot of people argue both ways on this. From my personal experience, if you get like a C500 or something like that, and you shoot with it, and you look at the image that you get when you shoot the 10-bit XF ABC, and then you get their 12-bit. I think on some of the, so there's also this thing with RAW, which is like how many bits linear versus how many bits log. So when I say a 10-bit I'm talking 10-bit log, like C-log3 10-bit, versus like a 12-bit RAW. 12-bit RAW linear, when mathed out correctly, can get you probably an equal sort of image to what you would get from 10-bit log, but there's just slight differences in the highlights and the shadows compared to recorded in log. But the hassle, the bit rates, the type of media that you have to use, like all that makes it where, like, I just don't see the point.
That's the one thing that I have found out that was pretty interesting. Like I've had the Blackmagic 12K, the Ursa, for the last couple of weeks, and I've been testing that out. And even the 12-bit, like I can get even the 12K, I can edit on my computer.
Yeah,
12K,
it's so well optimized.
Raw.
Yeah, and that's great, because if you had some 12K Canon RAW file, your computer would just run away.
Have you bothered with that whole workaround? Do you just edit strictly on DaVinci, right? You don't mess with Premiere anymore? I edit on both because just some projects are easier, and I have presets and whatever for Premiere Pro. Like all of my episodes I try to do on Premiere Pro, but I'm starting to switch things over creatively towards DaVinci. Right. And what I find is that in order for you to even edit ProRes Raw, you have to edit it in Premiere Pro. Like you can't do it in DaVinci
or Final Cut.
Or is it Final Cut too? I don't know.
Final Cut would be the native one because ProRes Raw is Apple, right? So Final Cut's the native. Premiere has a plugin or whatever for it.
Right.
There isn't one for DaVinci, whether you're on Mac or PC.
Regardless, it's kind of like, it's the opposite of what I want RAW for. Like I want it, if I shoot RAW,
for flexibility, yet it's telling you where you can edit it.
I want the extra information so I can color grade. And the fact that it's not like offered in DaVinci is really frustrating for me, because I then have to do this whole workaround where I import it into media encoder and then
turn it into like 444.
444, which is like a ridiculous inflated file size. And then you bring it into DaVinci and it's noisy as hell, and like there's not even that much more flexibility than like I'm not.
Well, that's the problem, is because the third-party things, there's limitations on. There's a lot of communication between the manufacturers to get the white balance adjustments right, or to unlock ISO adjustments, and because it's not an end-to-end sort of pipeline, if say Nikon didn't give the right thing to Atomos, or Atomos didn't get the right thing from Panasonic, then you can't adjust this or that, and it really starts to question why. And I'm not against external recorders. I'm recording this on external recorder. I love the Atomos recorders. It's just that I don't use them for RAW. I just record in DNX because I'm still getting that smooth editing.
What do you shoot in RAW, or do you shoot anything in RAW?
Because I don't shoot on Blackmagic right now, I don't shoot in RAW at all. Everything that I shoot is primarily, I use DNX, but it's the same as ProRes, but like for people who prefer ProRes. But I just basically shoot 10-bit log in like a mezzanine codec that edits really well in the HQ version of that, straight to an SSD, pop the SSD in my computer. You can edit right off of it if you wanted to. I back it up, but you know.
When I first got the A7S III, I was excited about the ProRes Raw because I was shooting Anamorphia 2 with it, and but I wasn't shooting in RAW. I was just shooting in 10-bit. And but I wanted to do a test of like the color grading, especially like the city, as I do like these stupid Blade Runner style color grades where I'm like completely shifting hues into one corner and then inverting them and then adding, saturation and all this other stuff to other hues. Like that's very demanding. And so, but the 10-bit codec held up well enough that I didn't have to shoot RAW, Right. And it was a much faster workflow for me than having to, if I, shoot ProRes Raw and then run it through Media Encoder just so I can then put on these color grades or tweak with these color grades in DaVinci Resolve, I would have, killed myself.
And again, it would depend on the RAW out of the camera, because if you're only getting 12-bit linear, you're probably not going to get much better color flexibility. You'd need 16-bit linear, which admittedly, I think a bunch of the Sony cameras are offering for the ProRes Raw now.
Yeah.
But you're going to need like a 16-bit, like 14 to 16-bit linear to make it even worthwhile for a color thing. Because if you're only getting 12-bit linear, I don't think that the color is going to, what do they say? Like it's not going to break any less soon than a solid 10-bit log recording would,
Yeah. What's funny is like right around the same time that we started getting 10-bit on these, consumer cameras or prosumer cameras, I guess. YouTube algorithm or the YouTube compression has just gone into the toilet. And so all of like, now that we have these amazing cameras that no longer ban the sky and my footage looks great on my end.
YouTube bans the hell out of everything.
It's just so compressed down and like, it's like the worst I've ever seen. Like Anamorphia 2 is like, it's so hard for me to watch that and enjoy it because there's so much of that short is in the shadows. And so much of those shadows are just being compressed into a gobbly mess. It's just awful,
That's one of the reasons why I changed my set, because of the purple banding was so bad. It was so bad.
Right
I had
here,
to break it up.
You're going to see a bunch of banding right in here, It's there. But anyway, I was considering exporting it out and re-uploading it in 8K just so I get that higher bit rate and like less band, you know what I mean? They just give you more information.
But it won't ever change the bit depth or YouTube's bias against dark. So because Anamorphia has a lot of dark, and because it's still going to be 8-bit,
you think
it's still going to beat it up. Yeah, it won't matter the resolution.
Oh, I thought it was the bit rate that is what's pushing it all, making it into just a mess.
So, okay, so the higher resolution that you give YouTube, the more bits it allows you. I used to tell people, don't upload 1080p. Just take your 1080p video and export it as like 1440p, and then it's not that much bigger, but you get more bit rate from YouTube.
They don't compress it as much.
The problem isn't so much of that; it's more of the bias that the compressor has. So dark areas are given less. It's an intelligent compression. So if you have a darker area in your shot, the compression automatically sort of says, we don't need much information there. Save the information for the high areas. And that's why even if you watch Netflix or something, you'll notice that whenever it's a dark scene, it's almost like the blocks get bigger and grosser. It's because these internet compression methods don't favor dark. They don't give much data to dark. So the resolution will give it a higher ceiling for data, but the algorithm of the compressor still hates dark. So really the best advice you give somebody for a YouTube channel is go bright and busy. Because anything that's smooth and dark, YouTube's just gonna take it. And watch my videos from 2020 if you want to see what it does. Because it just
then why are we even bothering with RAW and 12-bit or 16-bit linear? Like why are we messing with all that when YouTube is just like pushing it through a Play-Doh?
I suppose intention is everything. I don't know. You know what? I do this too, and I don't really know why.
Bro, it's future-proof because when I get a big deal and I go back in time and I want all this footage to edit my documentary about the story of my life and my challenges, I'm gonna.
And I do that too, but it's delusional. It's delusional. You're never going to use those things for anything.
Side note: how many terabytes of footage do you have?
So I'm good. I don't keep old footage. Period. I keep the export.
What?
Yeah, I don't keep old stuff. I'll keep it for like a couple weeks. Make sure.
Oh, brother. Oh man, I wish I could adopt that policy. Dude, I take a stab at how many terabytes do you think I have? Just guess.
I don't know, 700.
Oh Jesus, no. I mean that's pretty.
Oh,
Gangster.
terabytes. Sorry. What, you got a petabyte? You're running Amazon Cloud Services.
I know.
Terabytes. You probably got like 5 to 6 terabytes of drives or something.
I have 24.
Jeez.
24 drives of 8 terabytes. So I'm at, what is that? Is that like
256 or something?
No big deal. You just did the math correctly.
Or it might be 192. What did you say? You have 8 drives of...
I have 24 drives that are 8 terabytes each.
Yes, that's a 192.